We were created by God, for God, and until we understand that, life doesn't make sense. My name is Carolyn Conklin. I'm a wife, a mother, Grammy, and a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm also the epitome of a person who went to church Sunday after Sunday after Sunday and knew of Jesus, of God, but did not have a growing personal relationship with Him. When my husband Kerry and I moved to McKinney, Texas, we were fortunate enough to be asked to join a Monday night Bible study, and there was a gentleman named John Rhodes. He was from Grace Bible Church, and I was just fascinated by how he could maneuver through the Bible and share, and I can remember thinking, I want that. So when my husband and I moved to Benbrook, we literally, old school style, pulled out the yellow pages and the map of Fort Worth and looked for a Bible church, and that's how we landed at Doxology. After I completed my professional career as an elementary educator, I had the opportunity to listen to a group of people share about a program where adults from church came alongside students at an elementary school and mentored them. In a sense, God has kind of healed me because the school I was at was it was a hard school. It was really trying to head it in a better direction, and I felt like I was just didn't succeed at that. Well, all those skills that I had, I'm able to use with Hero to Hero and Read to Win. So it's like God's saying, I do have a purpose for you, and there is a reason for you becoming an educator and working with people. For me personally, working with volunteers and students and teachers and the faculty and staff at South Hills has been highly rewarding because I have learned a lot about myself. Some of these kiddos and families come from some hard places, and they're dealing with things that I've never dealt with in my lifetime. And being there to help them, to support them, to allow them to see, hopefully, to see God it's what we're all about. It's how we're created. It's what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, if you know Carolyn, or if you've been a part of Hero to Hero or Read to Win, you know that what she's discovered is absolutely right. She's discovered her purpose, and the more that she's made for it, she's living into it. But I was actually just thinking a couple of minutes ago before we even got up here, I don't even think she's aware of the impact of just one decision, what that can make in the life of another person. She mentioned a little bit of it. Certainly there's an impact on people like me who are mentors with Hero to Hero. That's one of the most valuable hours of my week as far as investments go every single week, right next to this one. That's a powerful, powerful thing to get to be a part of. Not only just in the lives of the students and in the faculty and the people around those schools, but in this moment, there's another church that's meeting called Doxology Espanol. It's meeting just in the chapel right over there. Somewhere between 150 to 200 people whose lives have been changed. They're worshiping together. And the whole reason that church exists started with something that started with Carolyn reaching into some of those schools. And so the ripple effect of a life that's lived on purpose is a powerful, powerful thing, sometimes in ways that we don't even realize. So that's why we're showing some of those stories, is to encourage all of us to ask the question, what am I made for? And how can I take a step towards it in this series? So, hey, grab a Bible if you would and start making your way to Ephesians Chapter 4 today. Ephesians Chapter 4 is where we're going to be today. And if you need a Bible to borrow or to keep, grab one of these. They're right there around you. I'm on page 800 of these, so you can literally be on the same page as me. Just grab one of these Bibles and get it in front of you. Ephesians 4, page 800 of those. This is week 4 of a series that we've called Made for More. And I've been thinking all week about how to reset this series and everything we've said over the last 4 weeks for those of you that are guests today, or maybe those of you that show up and you don't think about my messages all week like I do. So I think I got a way that I can reset this whole series, but I'm going to need a little grace from you as I do it. Is that okay? So let me give you a little caveat before I give you my introduction. I love Fort Worth. All right, every time Carrie and I have to go to the other city in the Metroplex, we thank God that we get to live in Fort Worth. Okay, anytime we go for a vacation, we come back. We love Fort Worth. We love to get to come back to Fort Worth. So I'm Fort Worth, ride or die. We together? All right, can we talk about the stockyards? Specifically, can we talk about the cattle drive in the stockyards? Have you experienced this? Holy moly. So here's how this works. A couple of times every day, tourists line the street in the stockyards, and these people dressed as cowboys parade these beautiful, strong, majestic, totally humiliated creatures down the street from one pin to another pin. Have you seen this? And all the while, they're just totally humiliated. They won't even look you in the eye as they walk down the street. They're just looking at the ground thinking, oh, here we go again, lumbering from one pin to another pin, one place to another. But that's what they do all day, and they're pathetic. They're just so humiliated doing this. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but if you're standing there on the side of the road watching these longhorn cattle parade down the street, I just can't shake the thought, maybe you can't shake the thought, it seems pretty evident they can't shake the thought that they were made for more than their life they're living. And here's the question of this whole series that we've been in for the last 4 weeks. Is it possible that you are too? That you're made for more than just lumbering from one pin to another pin, home to work, and back to home, home to class, and back to home again. Is it possible that you're made for more than that? See, the thing is, most of us have a sense that we are made for more than that. We're just not really sure how to live into it or exactly what it is. The book of Ephesians says that God made all of us alive. We just saw a picture of that. And not only did he make us alive, he made us to live alive, to take life with us everywhere we go. Every single one of us is custom designed, hand tailor-made by God and placed in specific places, sent to specific places on purpose and with a purpose to bring the fullness of who Jesus is in a way that brings flourishing to the places that we're sent. We don't have to make something of ourselves. That's the good news of the Bible. We just have to refuse the life that he's given us and is inviting us into. Chapter 1 of the book of Ephesians, Paul prayed for enlightenment. He prayed that we'd get that we'd know Jesus, not just know about him, not just show up places that he's talked about, that we would know him and experience the hope of our calling. Then last week, Paul prayed for enablement, that we'd actually live into it, that we do it. What fuels us, what makes us go, it's not guilt. It's not obligation. It's not fear. It's not religious ritual of some kind or another. If it is, we'll inevitably blow up or burn out or sit out the purpose for which God's made us. He's talked about and prayed for enlightenment. He prayed for enablement. Today he's going to talk about empowerment. That we'd increase in this thing that God's called us to. Here's the question that he wants us to ask this morning. Am I progressing towards my purpose? Here's the idea Paul's going to drive at today as we get into Ephesians chapter 4. When the life and power from God comes into our life, it's fully present in our life. Everything that we need to be who we're made to be is present within us. It's available to us. But the idea is that any of us live into it all at once, all of a sudden. Like when we put our trust in Christ, we receive new life. But it's new life. Like an infant, all of us have the genetic makeup and DNA that we need and that we will need for the rest of our life. But we have to mature into who we are. So the question Paul asks, the question for all of us isn't, are you fully living into the more that you were made for? The question is, am I more like the more I was made for than I was the day before today? But how do you know? See, here's the thing with maturity. Nobody really wants to stay or be mature. You understand that? Like nobody, even from the youngest person, doesn't want to be immature. Nobody wants to stay immature. Like, so our community group, we've got a family in our community group that has a 4-year-old. Last week, the week before, I was at their house, and we were out in the backyard. All the kids had been playing together, and I saw this little 4-year-old. One of the other kids made him really mad. It was one of those moments where you could just tell he was mad, like his fists were clenched, and his face was getting mad, and his teeth were gritting, and you could tell he was searching for just the perfect thing to say or do to the person who had done something or said something to him. And I don't know what it was, but it was one of those moments where you knew it was safe to sit back and watch and see what would happen. So he's got his fist clenched, and his face is getting red, and his teeth are gritting. He's searching for the right thing to say or do. And the thing that he finally came up with, like the most devastating thing that he could think to do or say to a person that had wronged him in that moment, he looked at the other person, and with clenched fists and gritted teeth, he says, You're a baby. Even as a 4-year-old, he knows nobody wants to be immature. Nobody wants to stay immature. But here's the thing about maturity. You can't really measure it. You can only track it. Sort of like when you take your kids to the pediatrician. They measure several different things over a period of time, but it's also they can plot it and track it. And they'll tell you kind of how you stack up, but the pediatrician is always pretty quick to tell you it's not really just about how they stack up. That's really not what's important. What we're looking for is progress. We're asking the question, are they on track? As long as there's not something extreme that you need to pay attention to, it's not really about how a kid stacks up. It's about whether or not they're on track. That's what Paul shows us starting in Ephesians Chapter 4. He gives us 3 big metrics to watch in our life to answer the question, are we on track? Are we progressing towards our purpose? Chance to ask ourselves, are there extremes that we need to pay attention to in our life and on our growth track? But really the question is, am I on track towards living into the more that I was made for? Or am I stuck where I'm at? We still together? Okay, look at Ephesians Chapter 4. Beginning in verse 1. Paul says this, Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. The words live a life literally mean to walk. So this is nothing that Paul hasn't already said, but you get the idea of progress and process. A walk is simply a series of ordered steps in a given direction. That's what a walk is. And Paul says, here's the deal. I'm asking you, really, I'm begging you to take a series of ordered steps of progress towards the thing that you're headed to. I want you to walk. I want you to live a life that's worthy of your calling. The word worthy means giving weight to. So he says, with every step, I want you to give weight to who you are and who you're created to be. So I'm begging you to give and live a life that gives weight to what God's called you to do. And then he gives us the first metric of maturity. Look what he says, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2 to 6. He says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Here's the first metric. If you're taking notes, you can write down complete humility. Complete humility. Everything else describes that and what Paul says. Complete humility. That's the first metric on the growth chart for those of us who want to live into the more that we're made for. Okay, you understand this about toddlers in your house? You ever had toddlers in your house? You remember being a toddler in your house? It's true of physical toddlers. It's also true of spiritual toddlers. They live in a me-centered universe, right? My needs are the only needs, or at least the biggest needs. What I want, my timetable is the only timetable, at least the most important timetable. The world and everything in it is mine. My comfort, my personal happiness is the only grid through which I'm able to process my world. And if anything happens in my world that makes me uncomfortable and keeps me uncomfortable, somebody else has a responsibility to change it so that I don't have to be uncomfortable anymore. And listen, when you're an infant, when you're a toddler, that's acceptable. In fact, that's even expected out of infants and toddlers. You need to be fed. You need somebody to clean you up when you mess you up. You need to be taught to be gentle, to play nice with others. We're not surprised by that when we see that in infants and toddlers, but we expect you to grow out of it. We expect you to grow through it as you mature, at least the design, that you get to a point where you take this journey from feed me, clean me, entertain me, through where you're able to take responsibility for yourself, and ultimately where you would choose to bring another person into the world, and you would take responsibility for their care, their feeding, their cleaning. Somebody else who believes that the world revolves around them. Humbly, gently, patiently help them mature. So where does the complete humility dot fall on your growth chart this morning? Again, the idea isn't that you arrived. Okay, let's be honest, I'm a parent. Some of you are parents, you remember being parents. Like, I'm still not there as a parent. In the complete humility thing, like I got 3 kids, okay? They think that the world revolves around them all the time. And the truth is, some of my biggest fights with my kids in our house is because they believe the world revolves around them 100% of the time. And I want them to understand that the world needs to revolve around me most of the time. And poor Carrie's the only person in our house that's humble completely. The only mature person in our whole house. Even she's maturing, right? So the question isn't, are you mature? The question is, are you making progress? Mature people almost never declare themselves mature. You ever realize that? The question is, spiritually speaking, are you maturing? Complete humility. You find yourself more gentle with people around you? Find yourself more patient with people that are taking longer to become who they're supposed to become, to do what they're supposed to be doing, the timing that they're supposed to be doing it. You find yourself bearing with others in love increasingly? Or like spiritual children, do you find yourself coming up with new things to fight about all the time? That's one of the saddest things that I see in the church, a lot of models that the church has for discipleship these days. We learn lots of information. We learn lots of facts. We learn lots of trivia. And we call it maturity. But we just use it to start fights with other people. Find new ways to divide among ourselves. Paul says that's ridiculous. There's one God, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's in all and through all. Like, have conversations with each other about things that you disagree with. That's what adults do. Kids find ways to bicker and fight, bully each other about their differences. Paul says, be maturing. So how do you know if you're on track towards your purpose? Well, just one metric on the growth chart, but Paul says, think about your life. Does it revolve less and less around you than it did last week or last year? Are you on track or are you stuck? Where are you giving of yourself, your resources? Take the fullness of Jesus to dry, cracked, parched places where you live, to people that are desperate for him, regardless of what it does for you. First metric, plotted on the growth chart. Complete humility. But it leads to the next thing that Paul talks about. Look at verse 7. He says, but to each one of us, notice those words, those are going to be important to his discussion, but to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. And notice again, this isn't new, it's what he's been saying all along. You're designed, tailor-made, given strengths and abilities and a purpose from God to accomplish God's purpose through you. Each one of us. He says, verse 8, this is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. What does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He's talking about the grave. He says, he who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. All right, this is so cool. I've talked about it before. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but here's the idea. Paul's connecting your design with God's purpose, with God's mission. And he paraphrases a psalm there. It's Psalm 78, which was a victory song that people would sing at a parade for their king after their king had won a great victory on their behalf. So tomorrow is Armistice Day, Veterans Day, where the U.S. gets to celebrate its veterans. I hope if you are an American or if you enjoy the freedoms of America, you're going to take a chance to say thank you tomorrow and celebrate that in one way or another. It's a day that started to celebrate the armistice that ended World War I, which is supposed to be the war to end all wars. And I don't know if you know this, shortly after the armistice was signed for the very first time, the city of New York threw a parade. They threw a parade to celebrate General Pershing and all of the veterans that had fought to welcome them back home. It was a parade, a victory parade. Psalm 78 has a similar idea. The difference was in ancient times, when the king came back, he led all of the people that he'd conquered behind him in the parade. They followed the trail end of the parade. He took them captive, and they followed behind him, humiliated. The people who used to be powerful were behind him, now powerless. And the people cheered the powerful king who had conquered them. You understand what Paul's saying here? He's using an illustration. Paul says, when Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, he led a parade. He led captivity itself captive. So think about that. All of the things that used to hold you down and hold you back from life that's truly life are trailing behind Jesus, humiliated. That's sort of a compelling picture, isn't it? Now think about it. Your past, your failures, your habits, your excuses, all of the stuff that used to hold you down and hold you back is now humiliated behind Jesus, powerless, trailing behind the King who came to set you free. It's the idea. Led captivity captive. You notice it also says that the king did another thing. There's something else that the king did back in ancient parade. He would bring back with him all of the wealth of the place that he'd conquered, all of the riches of the kingdom that he'd conquered, and he'd trail it behind him in the parade, and he'd give it out to people along the parade route who were his subjects, the people who followed him, who knew him, the land that he was. So you get the idea of the parade going along, and there's this big treasure chest that follows behind the king. And every once in a while, the king along the parade would make eye contact with somebody in the parade who lived in his kingdom, and he would walk back to the treasure chest and look through it and find something that he knew they would enjoy and they could use, and he would pick it out of the treasure chest, and he would hand it off to them as a symbol of his power and his generosity and his victory. Okay, so imagine that's you. You're standing along the parade route, the king comes over to you, and he hands out a gift that he's specifically chosen for you to have. What do you do with that gift? You take it to your house and stuff it in a drawer because it doesn't really fit the design motif that you've got going in your house? No, you figure out a way for the design motif in your house to be designed around the gift that you've received, because it suddenly becomes the most powerful thing that you could possibly display to another person. You set it in a place, you frame it in such a way, you set it in a place in your house so that everybody who comes over to your house can see something's true about you. Not because of anything that's true about you, but because something that's true about your king, that you're a person who's known by the king, loved by the king, who's received a gift from a king who's powerful, generous, who knows you, and who chose this gift to give specifically to you. That's the image here in Ephesians 4. So the question is, what are the gifts? Well, look what Paul says beginning in verse 11. So Christ himself gave the apostles, prophets, evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. Okay, now be careful here. A lot of times when we think about this passage, and specifically when we think about these words, we think about these words as jobs that people have to do. Like the pros have them. Apostles. He gave some to be apostles. Oh yeah, I know the people with that job. That's like Paul. Paul had that job. He was an apostle. That was his role. Yeah, Peter, James, the apostles. Those are the people that had those. Like same thing with the prophets and the evangelists and the pastors and the teachers. We even teach it sometimes that way, right? So God gave the pros jobs. It's the job of the people with jobs, to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. The people that don't have jobs, to do the work of the ministry. That's true, and it's also not the point that Paul's making here at all. When Paul lists the 5 things here, he's not primarily thinking about the roles of the pros or the people with jobs. He's thinking about categories of gifts that are handed out to people who follow Jesus. How many of us have these gifts? How many people did he give gifts to? Remember back in verse 7, what did it say? Who received gifts? To each one was given a gift. That means me. I'm a pro. It also means you. There were people who had one or more of these jobs, these roles, but each one of us have one or more of these responsibilities. We each have gifts and giftedness that fit inside of each of these categories, and all of them are essential for us to move forward in our purpose, to fill the cracks of a dry, parched earth, the fullness of who Jesus is that brings flourishing. We still together? Okay, so take it back to maturity in our growth chart. We talked about complete humility. The second mark to put on the growth chart is mutual responsibility. That's what Paul's talking about, mutual responsibility. See, here's the thing. Most of us, we get to this we look at Ephesians chapter 1 and Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians chapter 3, the made for more thing, and think about our world and think about our neighborhood and say, yeah, I might be designed by God on purpose with a purpose, but I'm not whatever fills in the blank there. And then Paul comes around here in chapter 4 and says, that's totally right, you're not. And God designed it that way. I need you. And you need me. And the world needs us. Look at the categories he names. Some of us have gifts and giftings that fit in the category of apostles. Okay, again, you don't have the role of an apostle, but you may have an apostolic gifting. These are the people that extend and expand the message to places that it hasn't gone, to new places, the spiritual pioneers and entrepreneurs that love to take new ground. We've got these listed on the other side of your handout that you're taking notes on, potentially, with some other words that may sound familiar for you as you're trying to figure out where your gifts and your giftedness fit in all of this. Some people have gifts that are more apostolic in nature. They're the entrepreneurs. They love to take new ground. Some people have gifts that fit more in the category of prophetic. They're the people that see what could be and should be and gently, lovingly call it out for God's people to live into it. Some people have gifts that are more like evangelists. They're always thinking about the next person that needs to hear good news about who Jesus is and what he came to do and how to give it to them, make sure they hear it. Some of us are shepherds who guard the people that are already in, so to speak, cultivating and guarding, growing the health of the people that are already found, helping them mature, and pushing them to multiply. Isn't that the role of the shepherd? Some of us are teachers. They explain and organize and instruct people all along the way, wherever they're going. Here's the question. Which of those is most important to the movement of God and the purpose of God in the world where we live? Which one matters the most? If God's purpose is to fill every dry, parched crack in the earth with his fullness, which one's most important? Which one matters the most? Which one do we need more of? Yours, right? Because you're immature. I'm just playing with you. I am too. Which one's the most important in the purpose of God to fill the cracks of a dry, parched earth? All of them, right? Which one does Fort Worth need to fill in the dry, cracked, parched places of the world where we live so that they can have life and flourish? All of them. We need apostolic kinds of people who look at the maps and find the gaps and say, I'm moving my family there. People that can look at the nations, the places that don't have life and flourishing is hard to go, and they start strategizing ways that they can go, even if nobody else goes, and pioneer new ground so that life and flourishing can spring up in the places that hasn't gone before. We need people like that. We need people with gifts like prophets that can see places of injustice, see places of inequity and idolatry, the brokenness that the rest of us don't see, can't see, that can lovingly, gently call it out and call us up to something bigger. Work towards flourishing in some of those areas. Do we need some prophets in our world today? We need evangelists, people who are leading the way and introducing people in our culture to Jesus, showing the rest of us how to do that, a way that's not weird or gross, a way that points towards truth and brings life and flourishing. We need shepherds who can guard us and care for us and protect us and push us. We need teachers who can help us think clearly and understand the difference between truth and error. We need all of us. Only one of them, whichever one it is, and it gets kind of weird, right? But if we're missing any of them, any one of them, whichever one it is, we really miss out, and the world misses out. Does that mean that once you identify what your giftedness is, you never operate outside of your giftedness? You only operate inside those categories? Well, of course it doesn't mean that at all. That's not what mature people do. Jesus didn't have the spiritual gift of foot washing, but when the need presented itself and he realized he was equipped and he was present, he leaned into the need. God calls us to do the same thing. Sometimes we work outside of our giftedness, but the important thing is that all of us express our giftedness wherever we're at. Now, let me say one other thing about giftedness. A lot of times when we're using our giftedness, we don't feel like we're crushing it. And that keeps some of us from using our giftedness, okay? We're just doing what we do. We don't feel like it's special. It's just us. It's what we do. And I'll give you an example. It's just me. Like, I'm a gifted communicator. But I don't know that. Listen, because I stand up here on Sunday mornings and feel like I'm crushing it every single week. Then I'm standing up here, and as I'm using my gift, thinking, golly, these people really need me. Like, they couldn't live without me. I don't think that. In fact, if I'm being honest with you, a lot of times, even when I'm using my giftedness, I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know if I'm that good at this. Like, there are a lot of other people out there that could do this better than me. I know the pastors that you guys follow on Twitter and Instagram, like, they're good. Maybe I ought to just step back and step out and let them do it because they're better at it than me. And I'm not telling you that to try to get you to affirm me. Okay, in fact, I'll feel really awkward if you use this as a context to do that. Please don't do that, okay? I'm not trying to do this to try to get you to affirm me. I'm trying to affirm you and say, in the same way that some of you would look at me and say, no, Chris, we need your giftedness. I need your giftedness personally. I need you to do what you do and do it the way that you do it. There's a reason that you're doing what you're doing, where you're doing it. I need you to use your giftedness right where you're placed and right where you're sent. I would say the same thing to you. And even when you don't feel like you're gifted or the best one in our city, you may be the best one in your neighborhood. Even when you don't feel like you're the best, most gifted person in the world, you may be the only one who's faithful enough to go. And all the while, the design, the way that Paul lays it out, is that you don't go alone. You don't have to. Even if you go with an apostolic gifting and you go alone first, you're praying for others who will come alongside you and shave off the rough edges. Bring flourishing. Fill the earth with his fullness. See, all-stars win accolades, but relief pitchers win World Series. Go faithfully, go confidently where you're going, knowing that God can grow your gift or grow your team, but that he wouldn't have sent you if he needed somebody else. That's the question for you in your spiritual growth chart. Are you contributing to the purpose of God in the place that you're sent? Or are you living with the mentality that sees all of the work and sees all of the needs, just assumes somebody else will do it? It's not a mark of maturity. Maybe a great step for you would be to just sit down, especially in the context of a community group, with that list and just have a conversation. Ask them, how am I primarily gifted? I'm not sure I see it. What do you see? Ask together, who's God placed in my life with complementary gifts and giftedness that I need to link up with to see the needs around me met in my world or my neighborhood, in the nations, to see them filled with the fullness of the presence of Jesus so all the world can see who he is and know what he's like. And who isn't here that we need to start praying God would send in a hurry, because the needs are great, the place that we're sent, wherever that place is. That's the last thing. We'll talk more about it next week because Paul gives a significant amount of space to it in chapter 5, in some ways because I think it's the hardest one for us to grow into. Humility, complete humility, mutual responsibility. The last one is focused urgency. Focused urgency. Please tell me this is not just something that happens in my house. You got young kids or remember being a young kid. It's normal, right, when your family has a mission to accomplish. Let's say clean our rooms. It's normal for the kids to forget their mission shortly after being given the commission, right? Does that happen in other homes or just my house? They have good intentions. The commission was clear. Mom and dad gave instructions. They even created a sense of urgency in giving the commission, did they not? Right? Company's coming in 30 minutes. Clean up your room. And the kids were sincere. They intended to remember. They intended to complete the mission. But 30 seconds after the commission was given, something else grabbed their attention. They remembered that there was a high score they needed to beat on the Xbox. They gave their attention to the thing that was urgent, not to the thing that was important. Right? Good intentions starve to death in the absence of focused attention. I can hear some of you saying, well, that doesn't just happen for kids. But before you nudge the person next to you and create a circumstance that needs a marital counseling appointment? Can we just all agree? That kind of thing is not a mark of maturity. Look at what Paul says. He says, live in complete humility, live mutual responsibility. And then in verse 13, how long do we do this? He says, until we, what's the word? All. You know what the Greek word for all means? All. Until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, a mature person attaining the measure of Christ's full stature. So look at your world. Look at your neighborhood. Look at your city. Look at the nations. Is it all full? In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about our reach. Remember, I sent you home with a map of the city, actually dropped in the offering buckets. The places that you and I are sent already, what's our reach today? And you put the little dots, the places that you live, the place that you work, the place that you eat, the place that you shop, the place that you go for fun. It looked a little like this. We put it up there. You know, it would be really easy to look at that map. That's just the ones of us that turned that in, the places that life goes and is sent all throughout the rest of the week. It'd be easy to look at that and go, well, cool. I mean, we got it covered for the most part, right? But hang on, that's not the question. That's not the goal. The goal is not to expand our reach. The goal is that our reach is reached. And the question is it? And if it's not, is it possible that it's because we've been setting it out? See, some of those dots on the map, they represent you, places that you're sent. And if you're there, but you're not living into this, there are dry, parched places in our world that were designed for you to take the fullness of who Jesus is, places that it's not going, where life and hope aren't springing up, where people aren't flourishing yet. And it's not because they won't, it's not because they can't, it's because life isn't going where it's sent. Our intentions haven't received our undivided attention. God's plan is that it would. That this would just be the beginning. There would be people in other quadrants of our city, people all over the world, from our neighborhood to the nations, who could experience not religion, but flourishing, life that's truly life, that comes from the life giver. Because we decided we weren't going to be satisfied with immaturity in ourselves anymore. And we were going to bring our gifts to bear so that nobody else has to. We're done getting distracted by whatever the spiritual equivalent of Xbox is. We're going to lean in toward the exhilarating joy that comes from recognizing God made me for something. He made me for everything, but He made me for something. And I can't wait to discover what it is. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to lose a sense of urgency because I was made for more. So are the people in our world who don't know it yet. And how are they going to hear if nobody tells them? How are they going to see if nobody shows them? See, the point of church is not just for us to stay huddled up, fat, safe, and happy. That's the promise of heaven. Promise for today is His presence and His power towards His purpose, so that as many people can experience the promise of heaven as possible, and the promise of His presence in life today, and the invitation from God for all of us is to see it, to embrace it, and to grow into it, like our life matters for the life of the world where we're sent. Because it does. Can we pray together? Let's possible this morning that you've come to this place. It's just one of the places that you lumber back and forth throughout the week. It's a religious ritual that you've done from time to time to try to pay God off for the stuff that you've done. And the good news that you need to hear this morning more than anything else that you hear today is that you don't have to pay God off. He's already paid for you. He sent Jesus to live the life that you should have lived and to die the death that you deserve to die. And he offers you life as a gift. Gifts don't cost except to the giver. They're only received. And this morning you can receive life from him. It's as simple as right where you're sitting telling him, I'll receive the gift. I'm going to refuse life for one more day. That can happen right where you sit. Father, for the person that's receiving life this morning, person who recognizes that Jesus came to rescue them, to die on a cross to pay for their sin so that they could be forgiven, that their past trails behind him, the conquering king, that they've received a gift. I pray that they would be quick to tell someone about it. And Lord, for those of us who have received a gift, would you let this be the last day that we stuff it in a drawer and allow our good intentions to be starved to death with a lack of attention? Would you let us ask the question, what does it look like for us to be more like more that we were made for today than we were yesterday? And then to take another step tomorrow and another step tomorrow and another step tomorrow in your strength and your power for your glory, for the life of the world where we live. Would you let us see and experience and extend life that's truly life by the way that we live and the words that we say, every place we're sent. In Jesus' name, amen.